You knew this was coming. After tearing down MK 2011 twice and then doing the same to Injustice, it was only natural that MKX would come next. Before watching any further, be sure you've seen the 2016 MK 2011 critique, since it's vital to understand where I'm coming from with this one. Injustice isn't critical viewing, but it'll help to convey the evolution of the series' gameplay and story structure. I won't be delving into the mobile game or the prequel comic here. I covered the Injustice mobile game in that critique and there's barely any difference between the two. And while I did plan to delve into the comic here, I found I had far too much to say about it, so it's going to be split off into its own thing somewhere down the line. I mean, with the amount of inconsistencies with the game, it may as well be its own thing. So what is Mortal Kombat X exactly? Well, aside from an acknowledgement that the non-canon MK vs DCU is officially MK8, MKX is both the sequel to the 2011 Mortal Kombat and the eventual fulfillment of the original post-Armageddon plan to introduce a next generation of fighters. As such, the roster this time contains a number of classic characters as well as a ton of newcomers, none of whom particularly impress. If they're not ripped off from another franchise, they're the usual kind of kids of old characters you'd expect to see in low-grade fanfiction, mirror images or gender-swap versions of their parents. I'll say up front that the game's soundtrack is woefully underwhelming and unmemorable, which, considering the franchise it's a part of, is a real shame. As such, I'll be using Statronica's royalty-free OST inspired by the game because it's way better and has way more character than just about anything in the game itself. And why did they redesign the logo now? To make the dragon look angrier? It had been 24 years and they kept it the same until then just randomly felt the need to change it on the second game of the reboot instead of the first? What were they trying to convey with this beyond we like to change things for no reason because we're bad at what we do? In terms of visual presentation, the game looks great for the most part. While the graphics are an improvement over its predecessor, naturally given the generational jump, the actual aesthetic of the game is not quite so good. Some characters have fairly uninteresting designs, particularly the newcomers, while others just look bad. Scorpion in particular, for being Ed Boon's favourite character and the face of the game, has a terrible design, looking weirdly rounded and lacking any of the character his previous designs had. And sometimes the non-human characters can just exude this feeling of fakeness, you know? In particular, Goro feels really off when getting dismembered, like he just doesn't look like he fits in the world. But that one isn't that big of a deal because he's just a pre-order bonus. I'll be getting to that. As the fight goes on, characters get sweaty and blood and dirt get on their clothes and skin. It's a decent enough effect, though not as detailed as Dead or Alive 5 from 3 years prior, and it's quite jarring when it magically disappears between gameplay and pre-rendered story cutscene. The stages, while highly detailed, don't really leave much of an impression. They're mostly pretty generic and there were weirdly no returning stages until the pit returned via DLC. Not that relying on old popular things is the right way to go, but I don't think we've seen such an exclusion of old stages since Deadly Alliance, so it's weird to see. There's a precedent, you know? The character selection screen now displays character models, allowing the preview of alternate costumes and how the variations look, more on that later, which is a definite improvement over the previous two games. But it doesn't display alternate colours for those costumes, nor at all in arcade mode. This is just baffling. Is it because character select is normally in the faction background contextualized as the characters actually being there? It's okay for a character to walk out of nowhere on an abstract character selection menu, no one's going to mind. The voice cast partially carries over from the last game, including my favourites, and old or new, they all do a good job as one would expect from actors of their pedigrees. There aren't any bad performances, but the material they're given to work with leaves a lot to be desired. Luckily, they do get some opportunity to shine in the new pre-fight dialogues.
Headed for a fall, Goro.
Oh, exactly.
Because I'm gonna punch you in your fucking balls.
Drawing somewhat on the clash banter from Injustice, each fight begins with 3-line exchanges between the characters, all of which are unique to the pair, and there are quite a lot of them, not limited to one per duo. There are at least 2 depending on which character starts the banter, but there are usually multiple per starting character. These dialogues reference story events, character relationships and other media, and yes, each character does have special dialogue with themselves.
Is this for real? How many of us are there? There can be only one.
Similarly to Injustice and Sub-Zero in MK 2011, certain costumes change the character's voice or personality. In this case, some characters have human and undead forms and dialogue changes depending on form. Also, Carl weathers jacked, which is the coolest thing ever. Honestly, this is the area where the writing is actually at its best in the game, which doesn't bode well for the story.
Asshole.
See, unfortunately, most of the cast, in particular the old characters, are left with very little to work with due to the shorter campaign, altered character roles and personalities and the focus on a smaller group of characters. And sadly, those most affected are my three favourites from last time, Richard Epcar, Patrick Seitz and Karen Strassman. Raiden is barely in the plot, Scorpion is in it about as much but gets a little more to work with through his revenge plot, while Melina's personality is more subdued for better or worse, and Kitana speaks mostly in a flat tone, which is either because she's a mind-controlled puppet or just bad direction. Also returning are Tom Choi, Ron Banks and Jamieson Price, the latter of whom took over as Ermac despite Michael McConaughey still returning as Kano. Newcomers to the series are voice acting powerhouses Troy Baker, Steve Bloom, Tara Strong, Johnny Young Bosch, Jennifer Hale, Phil Lamar, Greg Eagles and Fred Tatasciore, alongside the likes of Ashley Birch, Trisha Helfer, Danielle Nicolay, Kelly Hu, Will Yoon Lee, Parry Shen and Vic Chow. Additionally, Jeff Pilson did not reprise the role of Johnny Cage, instead being replaced by Andrew Bowen, who does a fine job with what he's given, but there are far fewer memorable moments with Johnny despite his theoretically more prominent role. Bafflingly, Bowen got far more of a chance to shine in the Johnny Cage DLC trailer for WWE Immortals, where Johnny just shit talks Kane, The Rock and John Cena. It's honestly the best bit of writing MK's had in a fucking decade. One area I can always praise NetherRealm Studios for though is their dedication to including a whole bunch of game modes and unlockables so that their games aren't utterly bereft of content as most fighting games sadly are these days. Online features include standard matches in King of the Hill, which is fine when the lobby isn't full. Really, that mode needs to use single round matches to keep up the pace so players aren't sitting through up to 7 best of 3 matches just for a chance to play once. I didn't play a lot of the online, but it's fine if you're into that. Online modes also have Quitality, where the rage quitting player's character dies to give the other player some satisfaction. This is great and shows that the team can come up with really good ideas when they try. This could even be a way of bringing back harakiris, like when the player quits their character just kills themselves out of shame. On the single player side, the arcade ladder now lets you select from a few courses like in MK3 and 4, with Classic, Test Your Luck, Test Your Might and 2 flavors of survival. Then there are the living towers, which change regularly with various handicaps thrown in for various events like New Year's or Valentine's Day. Then there are the tower challenges, which are randomly generated towers with the intention of having you set a record for your friends to beat. Luckily, NetherRealm didn't promise a big reward for beating some retarded tower with bugger all for payoff this time. I'm not really into this whole RNG challenge thing, but you could sink a lot of hours into it if you are. On a related note, make sure your internet connection doesn't cut out in the middle of an arcade run or you're going back to the main menu. That's fucking unacceptable in 2015. The crypt returns of course and expands on the more open area from the last game, but in the style of a first person dungeon crawler with items you need to collect to advance. This is cool and all, but with the multiple areas that require loading screens to move between them and no real way to keep track of the rewards you've obtained or a fast travel system, it quickly gets monotonous trying to work your way around to find new content. I really think that a simple grid like in the older games would have been a better choice. You can contextualize it some other way with vaults in various locations or faction themes for example. What they have now, while creative, is just excessive, and it doesn't even have all the unlockables in there because some costumes require other actions to unlock them, from finishing arcade mode with the character, to winning 25 rank matches, to performing certain feats in the fucking mobile game. This was particularly frustrating for me because Injustice locked content in its own crypt equivalent, but all the content was unlocked by default in the complete edition, which is not the case in MKXL. I will give them credit for having a section for unlockable fan art, though it doesn't actually say who made the art, which is kinda fucked up. Still, it baffles me how so many other fighting games cite MK as this big inspiration for their shitty story modes, but never for having a ton of modes and content that gives the game longevity for players outside of the very specific markets of people who play fighting games online. Where are your extra modes and arcade endings, Tekken 7? Your time's fucking coming. Oh, and one last thing about the crypt. That retarded demon that popped up in the last game like something out of a YouTube video from 2007 was bad enough. But now we have skinned humans jumping out of blood pools and giant fucking spiders because that's something we needed in Mortal Kombat, right? Giant spider jump scares. Fuck you, NetherRealm. I hope your office burns down with no one in it. As can be expected from the iterative genre that is fighting games, the gameplay is an evolution of that seen in MK 2011, but also of Injustice. It plays mostly the same as MK 2011, though much of the awkward jankiness of the gameplay is gone. It feels much smoother, though still somewhat stiff. It still uses the same types of normals, specials, and meter-based attacks seen in 2011, with environmental interaction taken from Injustice. There are no stage transitions, but throwable objects exist now, and there's something of a twisted bend to it here. And for better or worse, there is no pig advantage. Unfortunately, we're still using the 2 health bars each approach from Injustice that I never liked. More on that in that video. The big new attraction this time is variations. Each character is given 3 variations the player can choose when selecting them. These determine which additional special moves, combos, and sometimes regular attacks the character can utilise. For example, Scorpion. Ninjutsu gives him sword attacks, Hellfire gives him fire-based attacks, and Inferno gives him a demonic minion. You can tell the variations apart with visual differences, which tend to just ruin the designs. Having extra weapons or additional visual effects is usually fine, but recoloring parts of the costume, adding garish neon lights, or making Sub-Zero's arms glow blue just looks awful. But yeah, variations are actually a really cool idea, but certain parts of how it's implemented really need some work to not make the game as painful to look at as Injustice 2. The X-ray moves from MK 2011 return and have somehow gotten worse. My issues last time were how long the damn things go on for, how they often inflict the kinds of injuries seen in fatalities but can be shrugged off here, and how everyone only gets one, making it irritating when you see the same drawn out move over and over again. Now though, every single one does 3 hits, which only like 2 did last time, making them last even bloody longer. And worse, the effect is seriously lazy now. It used to be that X-ray moves made the whole world around the characters go super dark to emphasise them, and everything around the X-rayed area was rendered in grayscale, both to emphasise the damage being done and to suggest the idea that what we're seeing is only being seen by us and not the characters. In this game though, the world barely darkens at all, similar to how fatalities are done in this game, and there's no grayscale effect at all, leaving it looking awkward and out of place like the street stage fatality in the last game. When a character gets hit with an X-ray or fatality, their headgear often disappears to avoid clipping, I guess. It comes right back after an X-ray when it would have been way cooler to let it stay on the floor to give the attack more impact. Goddamn SmackDown games on the PS2 had this feature, but not a game from 2015. Jeez, when did this turn into a 2K rant? Something that actually is implemented well is brutalities. Brutalities are an idea that never really took off in the past. In MK3 they were basically an ultra combo from Killer Instinct that made the opponent explode into 5 skeletons worth of bones. In Shaolin Monks they were a rage mode, and in DCU they were a non-lethal heroic brutalities for the DC heroes to use. Here there's something I've always wanted to see: lethal versions of special moves. Ending a round with a certain move after meeting certain criteria makes the move kill the opponent in gory ways. I just love the idea that Johnny Cage can hit someone so hard in the dick that their head comes off. It's brilliant. It's a cool, brief reward that requires some skill to obtain, unlike fatalities which are just awful now. I talked about this last time and in the Injustice review, but fatalities are now overblown, childish shows of violence that are often very fucking stupid. Sure, let the opponent's heart dangle into the hole in their chest like a goddamn cartoon. Sure, Jax rams the opponent's arms into their torso, why the fuck not? And let's be sure to keep the awful distance gimmick around, even though the camera angle is going to change once the move starts, so the characters can easily be moved to the appropriate distance away, you fucking idiots. No, let's just add frustration and assign the block button, which usually helps to keep the character from moving and fucking everything up, as the easy fatality button. Oh yes, easy fatality tokens, because you can now spend real money for the ability to hold block and press a button to do the finisher instantly. But you're not buying the ability to do that forever, no. This is not easy fatality DLC, which actually would have been better. Each use costs a token, so you're buying one-time only access to a finisher you're too lazy to input the code for, or can't be arsed dealing with the frustration of trying. Warner Bros, is it not bad enough that you ruined DC's chance at a film universe ever working out? Now you have to put this fucking microtransaction bullshit into every single fucking game you release. I mean, it's not as bad as Injustice 2 or Middle-earth Shadow of War, but fucking pack it in! And you know what's really fucking weird about finishers in this game? Faction kills don't require the use of a face button. Just hold R2, do the directional code, and it activates. Some fatalities even only require the directions without a face button that risks fucking it all up, so why the hell can't all of them do this? Yeah, factions is a thing. On starting the game, you're prompted to join one of 5 factions: Special Forces, White Lotus, Linkway, Brotherhood of Shadow, or Black Dragon. This is part of the multiplayer meta where your gameplay assists your faction and you get rewards if your faction has the most points at the end of the week. It's fine as something to do if you're into that sort of thing, but the main benefit is the exclusive finishers. Each faction has 5 finishers you can utilise, 4 of which are unlocked by gaining XP in that faction and helping them win. Now me personally, I don't really care about this whole faction thing, but it does give me an idea that I think would actually be really cool. Imagine if instead each character was assigned a faction and they then had access to this certain pool of special finishers, which could even be a way of including characters who aren't playable anymore like they did with Smoke. See, that would be a cool idea. But the problem with what they have now is that switching to another faction resets your experience in the one you left. So for example, if I wanted to leave the Special Forces and join the Lin Kuei so I could use the Smoke finisher, then go back to SF, I wouldn't have access to finishers 4 and 5 anymore and would have to start again. It's most likely intended to discourage players from switching factions regularly or joining the faction that tends to win the most, but discouraging players from trying out all the content is moronic. But it's sadly not the most moronic thing in this game, now is it? Given that the game is a sequel to MK 2011, a game which retold the events of MK 1-3 in a new timeline, it was only natural that MKX would at least partially adapt MK4. Shang Tsung is dead, so Deadly Alliance was most likely out, but Deception and even Armageddon were still possibilities. However, the team decided to take the story in a completely different direction after the events of MK4 are over, which was probably for the best. After all, I did complain last time about the plot not deviating enough until the end, and if it's just an alternate version of events we've already seen, then it may as well just be a retelling without any of the time travel stuff. However, this also has a drawback. Approaching the story that way last time gave the writers a basic blueprint to follow. The story is split into thirds based around MK 1, 2 and 3. Events draw heavily from those games but play out differently. As well as making the story easier to plan, it also provided a sort of inherent investment in the players who knew the original story and wanted to see how this new timeline would change those events for better or worse. In MKX though, that foundation no longer exists beyond MK4 and, well, that portion was going to be radically different anyway in light of Shinnok's forces now including most of the people who were against him last time, and more. Considering that Earthrealm only has Raiden, Johnny Cage and Sonya left from the last game, and only a handful of characters from the 3D era as candidates to join them, while Shinnok's got his full faction from MK4 and most of the good guys under his and Quan Chi's control, clearly Earthrealm's really going to struggle to pull through in this one. There's actually a lot of potential here for how the story could go, which I'll discuss in another video. For now, let's get into what actually does happen and how it just doesn't work. The story opens with Johnny Cage narrating over statues depicting the backstory of Shinnok's failed coup and the conflict with Shao Kahn. The timeline here doesn't match with previous games, which I discussed in the Align Through Time episode, but what ultimately matters is that after the previous game, Shinnok waited 2 years before making his move. This I find questionable. If Shinnok now has most of Earth's heroes under mind control, including the Mortal Kombat champion himself Liu Kang, why in Raiden's name would he wait 2 years to invade? In the original timeline, he gathered a few allies in Outworld, then lured the heroes to Edenia, which doesn't seem to have been restored here by the way. Moving the story to Earthrealm with the heroes on the back foot makes sense, but Shinnok's forces are considerably bigger here by default, even without dipping into Outworld's forces. Why then does he not just invade right away while Earthrealm is still trying to rebuild after the previous full-scale invasion? Strike now while the forces are drained from Khan's invasion and Raiden's not had a chance to gather more allies to prepare for the next attack. This is not the only plot hole I'm going to bring up before we conclude Chapter 1. The story proper opens with Chapter 1, Johnny Cage, where he, Sonya and Kenshi are leading a special forces team over a ravaged cityscape that resembles the cancelled Doom 4. Seeing Kenshi from Deadly Alliance here would naturally lead many to assume that Raiden has been using his visions of the future to find more warriors from post MK3 and recruit them early, but no. Kenshi is the only one who shows up aside from the cutscene only Fujin. Earth's forces consist of 5 warriors and some random red shirt soldiers who can't do a thing. Let's see how well they do. Straight away, Scorpion appears, killing some of the soldiers before Johnny engages him. This is where we're introduced to one of the 2 things that's changed about the design of the story mode from Injustice: QuickTime events. Instead of random mini-games like Injustice, certain fights feature button prompts so they can have cool fight cutscenes without anyone complaining that they should be playable instead. And the choreography in cutscenes, QTE or otherwise, is consistently really good. It's also clear at this point that the level of violence in the cutscenes finally matches what the series is known for. No more neck snaps and throat stabs, now we've got decapitations and blood everywhere. When Sub-Zero also appears to fight the heroes, you may notice that while still a zombie, or Revenant as they're now known, Sub-Zero is no longer a cyborg. This goes unexplained in the story, but there is an explanation in pre-fight dialogue Sub-Zero has with Eren.
No longer a cyborg?
I chose my Revenant form.
And you went with this.
So what they're saying is that Quan Chi allowed Sub-Zero the option to make himself weaker if he so desired. This seems unlikely, but the more pressing matter is that Jax didn't also take the same option. If Quan Chi offered Sub-Zero the choice, why not Jax as well? It's not like Quan Chi is shown to have greater respect for Sub-Zero than any of the others. And if they're brainwashed to be utterly devoted to Quan Chi, why would Sub-Zero not choose to remain in the form that allows him to best serve the pasty fucker? Clearly, they just cobbled together a bullshit excuse to have a classic Sub-Zero again, since they'd be stuck with Cyber Sub-Zero and Noob Saibot otherwise. Given the whole next generation angle the game goes for, why not introduce a young Cryomancer who becomes the new Sub-Zero under Cyborg Kuai Liang's tutelage? Or do as I suggested last time and have Bi-Han's story parallel Deception Scorpion and Armageddon Sub-Zero, with him being purified by the Elder Gods and made their champion, then trying to save his brother's soul. The variation system would work well here, giving him Cryomancer, Wraith and the amalgamated champion variant. But no, just backpedal on what you changed instead of building on it to make something cool and new. They do that a lot in this game. Kenshi sends Sub-Zero flying and Johnny tackles Scorpion out of the chopper and survives his fall with no serious injuries. The chopper goes down and the two fight proper. At this point you may notice that the transition from gameplay to cutscene is far less jarring than the previous game. MK2011 had a real problem with the pre-rendered cutscenes being too compressed and pixelated. It was less of an issue with Injustice, but it was still there. With MKX, if not for them being used to mask load times, and the characters suddenly being cleaned up in the transition, I wouldn't have been able to guess that they even were pre-rendered. On the subject of pre-rendering, while I'd prefer they be done in real time so we can properly appreciate the graphics and maybe mess around with costumes, after playing Street Fighter V, which often had to load in the middle of a cutscene to cut to a different location for a few seconds, then load again, I can easily understand that NetherRealm does this to keep up the pacing and make the scenes more presentable. Once Scorpion goes down, Sub-Zero attacks. Johnny is somehow able to resist his freeze attack and fights him off, lamenting that they're not on the same side anymore despite having only met Sub-Zero once in this timeline. After Sub-Zero is dealt with, the trio regroup and head off to the portal to the Jinsei Chamber. The Jinsei Chamber is a new location within Raiden's Sky Temple in Earthrealm, introduced in this game that we are to believe that Shinnok was always after in both timelines, hence him challenging Earth's forces in Edenia in the original timeline. The chamber provides access to Earthrealm's life force, which Shinnok hopes to corrupt. Speaking of which, we then transition over to the exterior of the Sky Temple, where Raiden and Fujin are fighting off an army of demons. Raiden is now in his MK1 design for some reason, which I'll be discussing further later on. Quan Chi makes his presence known by killing one of the demons, for no reason besides bad writing. But glory hallelujah, Quan Chi has a new outfit. It only took, what, 13 goddamn years for him to change his fucking clothes? Wow, I mean, it's a shit outfit, don't get me wrong, but it's something different at least. He calls Raiden and Fujin Earthrealm's gods, but no mention is made of the gods of Earth, Water and Fire, despite the original timeline having them die in this very story. It wouldn't even be difficult, just have their bodies appear in the area here, or have Quan Chi acknowledge the other three having fallen to encourage these two to give in. Quan Chi is then joined by Sindel, Striker and Cabal, the latter two sporting their designs from the previous game, unlike Sindel and Sub-Zero. This establishes the pecking order. Those who matter have new outfits and are allowed to speak, those who don't do not. Although Striker did die in his armor last time, not his shirt. Bad continuity number 943. Naturally, we don't get to actually play this fight because character chapters are still considered a good idea by stupid people, so we instead return to Johnny's group. The trio arrive outside the entrance to the portal where Jax and Smoke stand guard. Sonya is concerned when she sees Jax transformed into a bald man like Annihilation, but before they can do anything, Nightwolf arrives and Kenshi apparently knows him. They fight while Sonya engages Jax and Johnny fights Smoke. Despite being in the wrong outfit from last time, Smoke actually speaks, proclaiming himself Enenra because his codename really fucking matters when he's an undead thrall. Johnny beats him in the cutscene, not even in a QTE, then fights Jax in game. It's at this point that you may realise a certain odyssey with this game story mode that the previous three games didn't have. The arena is clearly not the same map used for the cutscene. Presumably it was so there'd be more visual variety in the cutscenes instead of having everyone in the same three places all the time, but it gets really jarring later on. I mean, why not expand the current pitiful stage selection with some of these other locales? After a somewhat inappropriate joke given who he's talking to and about,
Nice seeing them again.
the trio head inside and through the portal to the Sky Temple. There, Raiden and Fujin are struggling against the Revenants, despite Raiden having been able to best two trios of them, including Cabal and Striker, last time. Shinnok arrives and Raiden contradicts the opening narration by saying Shinnok's failed coup was millennia ago, not millions of years ago. Good job, guys! 20 minutes in and you're already contradicting yourselves. Granted, this discrepancy existed between Raiden and Shinnok's versions of the story in MK4, but they really have no excuse for not fixing it here. The two gods beat Shinnok's followers, including Fujin kicking Quan Chi in the head once and taking him down. This is the highlight of the story for me, Quan Chi finally getting his comeuppance by getting his shit pushed in multiple times to make up for all the karma he dodged last time. Shinnok blasts the two into the chamber and tries to suck them into the amulet, but Johnny kicks him in the back, knocking it away from him. Shinnok handily defeats Kenshi and Fujin before displaying some impressive fighting skills to fend off Johnny and Sonya, instead of just blasting them away with magic or having everyone go up one at a time. Shinnok tries to murder Sonya with magic, but Johnny intercepts the attack and awakens a new power. Drawing on the stupendously retarded backstory they introduced in Johnny's bio last time, about being descended from some warrior cults instead of dropping that shit like Jarek in MK4, Johnny can now tap into incredible power when those he loves are threatened. No, seriously, in this game developed for adults, this hammy power of love tripe is being treated as a major plot point. Fuck you. Johnny wins quite easily, though that doesn't really matter since you can skip fights now and even get a flawless bonus for doing so. Raiden seals Shinnok inside his own amulet because that's apparently an option now. He wasn't sealed inside it after his coup or after the invasion in the original timeline, just sealed in the Netherrealm. If he can be sealed inside an object like this instead of an entire realm, then why the hell did they not do it before now? But yeah, that's the MK4 section done. Johnny holds Sonya while Quan Chi and his crew flee off screen. Raiden claims even the Elder Gods can't destroy the amulet, which is another contrivance given that they created the fucking universe. Johnny smiles about Sonya having finally called him Johnny, and the story jumps forward 20 years to reveal that Johnny was telling all this to a new team of heroes. They missed the chance to have Johnny's place on screen remain the same during the transition to better showcase how he's changed, but that's not much of a problem overall. Needless to say, I'm not impressed. You may have noticed that only a few of the Revenants were featured here, and that list doesn't include Liu Kang, Kitana or Kung Lao. Why? No idea. It's not explained anywhere in the game or the comic. Quan Chi just keeps them in reserve for whatever reason. Now, you may say, Quan Chi was always plotting to betray Shinnok, so he was obviously just keeping his best fighters in reserve to let Shinnok lose. And you know what? That would be a perfectly fine explanation if not for a few factors. 1. It would surely be more advantageous to help Shinnok win, then take him out when he's weakened from the battle so that he'd be able to take over quickly. 2. Quan Chi doesn't intend to betray Shinnok anymore. Outside of his non-canonical ending in MK 2011, New Timeline Quan Chi's plot to betray Shinnok is never once mentioned. In fact, Quan Chi now spends the next 20 years trying to release Shinnok, so he clearly wasn't keeping his ace back as part of some grand betrayal plot. It's just a gigantic plot hole, plain and simple. And the ease with which Shinnok's forces are repelled, even with Quan Chi holding back most of his fighters, including 3 of his best, and them not bothering to recruit anyone from Outworld, is simply insane. Especially when the big hero is Johnny Cage. As Yahtzee once said.
Anyway, the plot, such as it is, involves a big evil god of death type fella imprisoned in an amulet, and everyone's really scared of him getting out, even though the first we see of him he's getting his shit pushed in by Johnny fucking Cage.
He's got a point. Remember when I pointed out last time that Johnny does progressively worse over the course of the story until he's a complete joke? He wins 4 straight fights in-game, loses a tournament fight in-game, loses in a spat in-game, loses a tournament bout in a cutscene, is supposed to die in a cutscene, goes down in 2 hits in a cutscene, and then goes down in 1 hit in a cutscene. And now all of a sudden he's the big hero who saves the day when faced with overwhelming odds? That's ridiculous. But, as per Netherrealm tradition, Johnny's playable role in the story is concluded and he'll do nothing but lose from here on out. So let's move on from those boring old characters and move on to the radical new generation man. Our 4 leads are Cassie Cage, daughter of Johnny Cage and Sonya Blade. She resembles her mother but takes more after her father in fighting style and personality. Her hairstyle is awful though. Jackie Briggs, daughter of Jax. She's basically a slightly less serious, gender-flipped version of her father who uses power gauntlets. Takeda Takahashi, son of Kenshi and apprentice of Scorpion. He primarily fights like Scorpion but with a few moves from his father. Kung Jin, cousin of Kung Lao. He's the most original of the 4, utilising a bow rather than just copying Kung Lao or Liu Kang's moves. He's also a massive prick and will be Cassie's foil for the majority of the game. Johnny sends the team to the Lin Kuei Temple for their first mission, to bring in Grandmaster Sub-Zero to make sure he's still their ally against the Netherrealm. Here we learn about some important details. The new Emperor of Outworld is one Kotal Khan, who has a truce with Earthrealm under the Reiko Accords, as in Reiko from MK4. The name seems to suggest that Reiko helps work out some kind of deal, but it transpires in the comic that Kotal Khan first worked with Earthrealm to foil Reiko's plans, so they named it after him. You know, instead of naming it after Sonya or Raiden, key people involved in the Pact's existence and Shao Kahn's reign ending respectively. It's just a fanservice-y nod to a character no one liked. Johnny mentions that Outworld is in civil war, which threatens the peace with Earthrealm, bringing us into Chapter 2, Kotal Khan. on. Now, I'm not going to be spending as much time on each chapter as I did the first, it's just that this one is perhaps the longest, is the last part of the story based on a previous game, and is the introduction to the plot where most contradictions are going to come up. But they won't be the last. Chapter 2 takes place in Outworld, which looks radically different from anything else we've seen of the realm aside from the Colosseum. Here, a chariot is being escorted by Ermac, newcomer Eren Black, and the Oshtek warriors of Kotal's clan. Inside the chariot, Kotal is cosplaying as Ogre from Tekken while he negotiates with Kano for weapons for use against Melina. Also with them is another newcomer, the Bug Lady Devora, who I hate about as much as Quan Chi. And keep in mind that it only took her one appearance to reach that point. While the carriage is stopped by debris, Melina, Tanya, and Rain appear to attack. You know Tanya, right, from MK4? A character who appears in the game that retells MK4 but doesn't get involved in the MK4 portion. Melina, now a lot more mature than the childish characterization she was given last time, has Shinnok's amulet. When Melina's forces attack, Kano makes his move but Kotal fights him off via QTE. Although you don't actually have to succeed in any of these, you can just do nothing and it leads to the same result. They then transition from the street to a completely different location for the fight. Kotal goes to finish Kano but is attacked by Tanya. Tanya is the first character you fight in the story who isn't a playable character. I'm not sure why they did this exactly. It's not like these were all put in place to be expanded into DLC characters later, though Tanya herself was. She's apparently working with Melina due to promises made about a free Edenia, which I guess is still merged with Outworld in this timeline. Kotal teleports up to the roof where Melina and Rain are. He knocks Melina off the roof and gets drop kicked off by Rain, which is hilarious, and then Kotal implies that Rain intends to betray Melina, which doesn't mesh well at all with the prequel comic. It seems like they were maybe going for this idea that no one working for Melina is actually loyal to her, because Kano is just bought off, Tanya's doing so out of this promise that was made to her, and Rain is apparently plotting against her. I'll come back to this more later on. Rain and Melina are defeated but managed to escape with the amulet. You may have noticed that throughout this entire chapter, only one location was used for all 4 fights, and that Kotal had to fight all of Melina's followers himself, while his own allies did nothing. This is an issue that remains from the previous NetherRealm games, though I don't think they ever had an entire chapter take place entirely in one arena before. They usually would use one for 2 fights then change to another or something like that. I think the closest they ever got to this was in Injustice 1, where in the second Batman chapter, all 4 fights do take place in the same arena, but since the arenas have multiple tiers, they were able to make it that 2 fights started in one part of the arena and 2 started in the other. But just imagine how much more interesting this chapter would have been if we could have played as other characters instead of just Kotal. Maybe even play some of the people on Melina's side. But no, this is the structure we're stuck with because NetherRealm Studios is a stubborn beast who adamantly refuses to see faults with its work. And yes, sadly, this is not the only time they do that, as we see straight away in Chapter 3, Sub-Zero. Sub-Zero, now restored to human, resembles his Deadly Alliance form but with a beard and lacking his grey hair, iced up arms and blue scar. Despite being the Grandmaster of the Lin Kuei now, as in the original timeline, he doesn't display the Grandmaster's dragon amulet in the cutscenes, nor does it make him grey. Small details, yes, but I'm not one to let these continuity issues go unmentioned, especially when the amulet does appear in gameplay. He leads some of his followers outside and pretends not to notice Cassie's team until Kung Jin brazenly approaches. We then see that Sub-Zero now has the scar from the old timeline. Keep in mind that Sub-Zero originally gained the scar between MK2 and 3, but that never happened here because he was converted into a cyborg during that time frame instead. But now, after being converted, killed, turned into a revenant and restored to human form, he just conveniently ends up with the same scar from the old timeline. I'll be discussing this detail more later on. For now, the Lin Kuei surround the fort and a fight breaks out. Sub-Zero defeats Cassie, then Takeda, then Jackie, and then Kung Jin. Sub-Zero lectures each one as he takes them down, pointing out their character flaws for them to work on over the course of the story. It turns out this whole thing was a training exercise Johnny arranged with Sub-Zero, meaning that Sub-Zero's role in the story is a complete fucking waste of time, and any actual relevant actions will be in cutscenes or getting his ass kicked. Sub-Zero criticizes their inability to work as a team and they all go home. I'm really not fond of these characters, and a big part of it is their designs. Jin's design is fine, but Cassie looks more like a rebellious version of her mother, or Nova from StarCraft. Jackie is a generic black military girl with cornrows, and Takeda looks more like a Special Forces Liu Kang than a combination of Kenshi, Scorpion and SF. They look too uniform, with not enough to make them stand out from one another, while the older versions of Johnny, Sonya and Kenshi give much better ideas of their personalities and allow them to look more distinct despite the fact that they too are part of the Special Forces. forces. The group receives orders from General Blade and return to the base in response to Outworlders being in Earthrealm. They meet with Sonya and Raiden and Li Mei from Deadly Alliance. Now, Li Mei was originally forced to compete in a tournament set up by the two sorcerers, which almost got her killed, but she was saved by Bo Rai Cho and was subsequently the first casualty in the Battle of Armageddon. Without the Deadly Alliance to threaten them, she is now the leader of the refugees and has lost all sense of identity in her design. Seriously, Deadly Alliance Li Mei was one of the best designs they ever came up with. Aside from caring about her people, this character has nothing to do with the old version and is here simply because they needed someone fans would know to fulfill this role, even though they could just as easily have given the role to Bo Rai Cho, who is already in the game, and established that he is wandering outworld trying to find people to help. But back to Li Mei, I'd love to know more about how her story diverges from the old timeline, but we learn nothing about her here. It's revealed that Chapter 2 took place in her village and she led her people out of there in light of Melina having the amulet. There were apparently a bunch of defences from all of Earth's hero factions to guard the amulet, which I'd never actually explained, so Raiden leaves to check on it. Li Mei mentions Kano, so Sonya goes off to make sure he's not hiding among the refugees. Sonya's kind of a dick to both Johnny and Cassie and tries to avoid Johnny. And no, they don't justify it all that well. She sends Cassie's team to Outworld for Chapter 4, Kung Jin. Weirdly, we get this exchange.
I don't know, I expected the sky to be purple or something.
Don't believe everything you see online.
Which is odd given that Outworld usually does have a purple sky and no explanation is given for that. Is it just in certain areas, times of day, weather? It's always depended which stage you were on, but actually drawing attention to this discrepancy and not offering an explanation is just bad writing. Jin starts questioning Cassie's position as squad leader, setting up part of her arc as proving to herself more than anyone else that she was chosen for her skill and not nepotism. The Reiko Accords are clarified by Jin that it's a pact of non-aggression, not support, which is why Outworld didn't help against Shinnok last time. In explaining this, Jin also mentions Jax being a revenant for no other reason than to prove that he's a massive twat. Sadly, Jackie doesn't take after her dad and break his spine, despite being more justified in doing so than he was. Now, it's not clear if this city is the same one from Chapter 2. Maybe another line of dialogue to make that clear would have helped, but then Eren Black arrives to find out what they're up to. Kotal Khan's followers are really popular among the fanbase, Black especially, but I couldn't tell you why. They're all just dicks, noticing a pattern. Jin is able to talk Black into taking them to Kotal, but this is a fighting game, so we need to arrange some pointless fights. So they pass an execution stand where some guy's about to be executed for petty theft. Jin steps in while Cassie lightly taps the supposedly badass cowboy to the ground. After the prisoner is set free, Black steps up to fight Jin and they actually have the fight in the same location where the cutscene takes place, or at least close enough. I'm not going to applaud them for not fucking up. We're then introduced to Master Blaster, Farah and Tor. Again, popular but for no reason. The other three are all taken down, so Jin has to QTE to save them from getting murdered. But since they're all incapacitated and the Oshtek would realistically go in for the kill, other guys in the background fight the Oshtek off because the team just started a revolution apparently. And yes, despite having multiple opponents against the team, we only get to play as Jin for both fights. It's almost as if character-focused chapters are inherently limiting or something. Devora brings more soldiers and tells them to wait while she consults with Kotal.
You want to take this opportunity to tell us what the fuck shit you were thinking?
Oh look, Ashley Birch playing a character with the most cringeworthy dialogue ever vomited onto paper by a human. Good to see such a varied portfolio.
I gotta wonder why you'd risk interrealm war for a bread thief.
Because not all thieves are irredeemable.
With that, we transition to Raiden's temple 5 years prior. Now this helps alleviate one issue I've had with NetherRealm story modes up to now, namely that one character will win 4 fights in a row, then job forever. Now it's less uniform thanks to being able to flash back to another point in time so that the character can be fleshed out more with less contrived scenarios. Although this does make the character seem weaker than the rest for not being able to win 4 fights in a row now. Guys, just drop the character chapters entirely and choose fighters on a fight-by-fight basis. Everyone else you infected with your shit story modes does that, so why can't you? So Jin sneaks into this temple to steal a small statue, but is stopped by Raiden, again in his MK1 outfit. The statue was given to Raiden by the Kung family after Lao's death, which Jin blames Raiden for. Raiden tests Jin's skills and suggests he join the Shaolin, but Jin isn't convinced. The implication here is that Jin was rejected by the Shaolin for being gay. I suppose I should applaud the team for not using Jin's orientation as a selling point or for bragging rights like most creators do these days. He's gay, it helps inform his character somewhat with being rejected leading to his standoffish nature, and they don't make a big deal of it. It's a part of who he is, not all of who he is. Yeah, when the Mortal Kombat team is more progressive than most of our society, we're in deep fucking trouble. Putting aside real-world politics for fictional ones, Kotal hears Cassie out but acts like a dick over the fact that Earthrealm didn't protect the amulet while under threat. You know, because Outworld offered to help protect it, right? So Jin steps in, showing Cassie up. Kotal thinks they're allied with Mileena for absolutely no reason and tries to have them execute it. I'm really sure that would go over well with Earthrealm, the group that toppled Shao Kahn, you fucking idiot. Jin challenges him to trial by combat, which would absolve the team of their crimes and make Kotal look bad for refusing. I'm not really sure how this makes sense, but it shows that Kotal is no less barbaric than his predecessor or his rival. The sad part is, I'm not entirely sure that's what they were going for. While the trial is supposed to be to the death, Jin spares Kotal and asks for help in finding Mileena instead. Devora objects but is denied. Cassie contacts Sonya to tell her about the deal, and we transition over to her for chapter 5, which will answer many questions but also raise many more. Sonya continues her search for Kano at the refugee camp where a corpse confirms his presence. Raiden informs that the amulet was replaced by a copy which Quan Chi isn't responsible for, so who made a duplicate that could fool Raiden, I've got no idea. On a similar note, did Quan Chi still have the real amulet after Mythologies in chapter 1, or are we pretending that never happened? Contact is lost with Raiden, so Sonya sends a team to investigate. They are never mentioned again. Johnny approaches and Sonya tries to walk away. We learn here that Johnny and Sonya divorced because she was always too busy with work and never had time for him or Cassie. Again, I will give them credit. While not a particularly original scenario, I will at least applaud that it wasn't the man who put work before loved ones and broke up the family, as I think is literally always the case. Now, Sonya's not entirely out of line since it suggested that pretty much all of Earthrealm's defense and negotiation with other realms fell to her. The problem is that her attitude towards the whole thing makes her out to be the bad guy where there really shouldn't be one, since her choice is best for the greater good, even if it means sacrificing in her family. Johnny storms off and we transition to Quan Chi's fortress 20 years ago. Sonya's weirdly light-hearted despite being in the lair of the man who turned her partner into a monster and the incredibly high likelihood that she will encounter said partner. The banter's amusing, sure, but it seems out of place all things considered. They approach some sort of blood pool which activates as Quan Chi, Scorpion, Sub-Zero and Jax arrive, making the player dread that this chapter is going to either take place entirely within this one area or be the exact same fights as chapter 1 but swapping out Shinnok for Quan Chi, or worse, that they're going to do more shitty handicap matches. Luckily though, handicap matches are not in MKX, making it better than 2011 by default. After knocking out Quan Chi, Sonya fights Scorpion and takes down Sub-Zero in a cutscene. Jack stabs Johnny in the back and the pool starts to create a double of Johnny, suggesting that the Revenants have new bodies after death, further suggesting that the original body still exists somewhere. They never elaborate on this point, but it's one of the more interesting aspects of the Revenants. Maybe this explains why the designs of the Revenants shifted so radically between 2011 and X. Sonya knocks Quan Chi out for a second time, then fights Jax. Raiden arrives to undo Quan Chi's spell, freeing Sonya up to fight Quan Chi proper.
Johnny Cage is mine.
No, he's mine.
Why isn't the writing always this good? You may also notice Shao Kahn's hammer and armor in the background. First of all, this armor is clearly the one from the old timeline which was retconned out in favour of his MK 2011 design, and if this and that are supposed to be the same armor, well, it kind of exploded along with its owner last time. And on top of that, Quan Chi doesn't even do anything with it. His ending last time had him turn Kahn into a Revenant, which isn't canon, so I'm not sure why Quan Chi even has it. We should have had a throne room stage where there are two versions of it, one for Mileena being in control and one for Kotal, kinda like the Asylum and Joker Asylum from Injustice, or the two versions of Bison stage from Street Fighter V, and the armor could be there in the background. Just saying, we could do with a few more stages. After the fight, Sonya has to weaken Quan Chi to sever his link to the pool, which is a QTE of her beating the shit out of him, and it's the most satisfying fucking thing in the world. Especially when she crushes his nuts. Again, it's like they were making up for lost time with all the shit Quan Chi's weaseled his way out of. Raiden destroys the pool, which restores Jax, Sub-Zero and Scorpion to their human forms. Now this is jumping ahead a little, but these three are the only Revenants that are freed by this action. The others remain Revenants into the present day of the story. This naturally leads me to my next point. Why? Why does destroying this pool release these 3 but no one else? For one, the idea that the pool is needed to maintain their revenant forms and keep them from reverting to human is ludicrous, especially with the implication that they were given new bodies that Quan Chi created himself. Second, why are only these 3 tied to this pool? Are there other pools that the others are assigned to, or is it some weird distance thing where if they're a certain distance away, its destruction has no effect? This is Quan Chi's fortress after all, so where would the other pools even be located? If he was just choosing the best fighters to defend his main base, why would he assign Jax and Scorpion instead of Liu Kang and Sindel? Why would Quan Chi only bring the 3 guys tied to this pool when that would leave him with no revenants on hand in the event the pool is destroyed? And it's not like the revenants have to remain within a certain distance of their respective pool in order to remain revenants. They travel to Earthrealm for fuck's sake, surely that's a greater distance away than any place they could go within the Netherrealm. Why is Scorpion affected by this when he's not a revenant? Scorpion is a spectre. Different forms of resurrection have different effects. Coming back in one's original form leaves them with blank white eyes, but they're otherwise fine, like Sindel or MK Gold Melina. Spectres, as far as we know, gain new powers and get the white eyes, as with Scorpion. Becoming a Wraith makes one's skin black and removes their powers whilst applying new ones, as with Bihan becoming Noob Saibot. Returning as a Revenant makes one appear rather ashen in 2011 and changes their appearance more drastically in MKX, and their eyes glow white, red or yellow depending on the game and situation. Are they seriously trying to retcon Scorpion into a Revenant? He doesn't have the yellow veins nor the yellow eyes that the MKX Revenants have. Yes, as I mentioned, the Revenants did have white eyes in the previous game's cutscenes, but it's not a strict adherence to the established design because the actual Revenants were drastically redesigned for this game. Nor is he under mind control as far as we know. It's suggested later that he may have been corrupted by Quan Chi, but it's incredibly vague. It's almost as if trying to attribute all of these vastly different forms of resurrection to one character was a bad idea or something, especially when said single character was explicitly not a necromancer in Deadly Alliance, hence him needing Shang Tsung's help in the goddamn first place. But yeah, the 3 most popular of the Revenants are restored, and Raiden heals Johnny with electricity, which doesn't make any more sense than when he did it last time. Raiden elaborates that he used his own magic with Quan Chi's to restore these 3, so is the pool irrelevant? Is it just that he can restore them because they happen to be here? Is the pool just used to draw in the souls and create new bodies? This magic shit is woefully underdeveloped. Quan Chi escapes off screen, of course, so we return to the present. Sonya explains to Li Mei that Kano fled to Outworld after Shinnok's invasion, but we've got no idea where he was prior to that. In the original timeline, Kano was in Outworld with Shao Kahn, while the only Black Dragon left, Jarek, helped against Shinnok. Presumably he was hiding in Earthrealm here since Sindel's attack prevented Sonya from encountering Kano during Kahn's invasion, which originally led to him being taken to Outworld. Sonya spots Kano using a hologram to blend in, which also changes his height? Okay. Instead of doing the smart thing and trying to rally the refugees against Sonya and Kenshi by claiming to be oppressed, he just reveals himself and Sonya beats him down. She tries to kill him, but Johnny convinces her to relent so they can get information on the amulet. The way the crowd reacts seems to suggest this is going to lead to some kind of descent later on, but it doesn't lead to anything. Really though, I'm just glad Kenshi didn't try to help and get knocked on his ass again. And yes, this is the only fight Sonya wins in the present. I guess Namco's attitude to 40-year-old women was right after all. We then move into Chapter 6, Devora, the worst part of the story hands down. Back in Kotal Khan's palace, Sonya relays Melina's location to Cassie. Devora suggests distracting Melina with the army while she goes for the amulet. Cassie convinces Kotal to let her accompany the bug bitch, and we flash back to 5 years ago, where Kotal and Reptile are convincing Devora to join them in their coup against Melina. The time frame is kind of a fucked up mess in this game, and the comic doesn't help by claiming the Civil War's been going on for 10 years by the time of the comic. And it actually gets worse after this. You'll also notice that Kotal Khan isn't actually green-skinned and naturally resembles Totek from Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light. Reptile begins to speak, which is fucking shocking after he appeared mute in the last game. Tarkatan storm the room alongside Melina, Ermac and Baraka. Kotal urges Melina to try and work with Earthrealm as war with the Netherrealm looms, which is odd since he doesn't seem too concerned about this when he tries to have Cassie and friends executed later in the timeline. Basically, Kotal and his allies rose up against Melina when she refused to work with Earthrealm since they killed her father. Reptile reveals he knows Melina's true origin as a clone of Kitana and that Melina has no real claim to the throne by blood. This possibly helps sway Devora and Ermac to switch sides as Devora tackles Baraka into the marketplace below, and his defeat leads into a QTE where the player inputs a fatality code leading to Baraka's death. This is the first reason I hate her. You can't make the player like a new character by having them kill off a popular iconic veteran. All it serves to do is make the player hate Devora. It's way more satisfying to do no inputs and just let him fall down. Melina is taken away and it's never explained how she escapes captivity. Ermac bows to the newly instated Kotal Khan and you start to wonder why Kenshi has telekinesis. See, Kenshi was supposed to learn it from Ermac in return for freeing him from Shao Kahn's control after MK3, which clearly never happened in this timeline since he continued to serve Outworld until now. It seems to be from his sword, which wasn't a thing it could do originally, else his meeting with Ermac would have been a pointless backstory detail. But this is just the kind of shit they do with this timeline. They change things about the backstory, which should really prevent certain plot developments and character details from occurring, but because they don't want to change things too much, they find some new bullshit excuse for it to work out that way. Things like Sub-Zero's scar and Cabal's burning. Again, I'll get into this more later. Back in the present, D'Vorah and Cassie sneak through Melina's camp and confront Rain. He reveals he convinced Melina to steal the amulet because it kills her when she uses it. Still no explanation on who made that fake, a fake that we also never see. Tanya attacks Cassie so D'Vorah can fight Rain in probably the most jarringly different location of all of these fights. And it's weird because while the forest gets play at multiple points of the story, this one is only used for this part of the plot. There are no more fights here after this, so why is it completely different? D'Vorah then fights Tanya in this completely different location, but Cassie stops her from killing them because Melina attacks before they can get the chest open because apparently Melina didn't think it was important to carry the amulet with her, especially when engaging an entire army led by a person who wants to take the amulet from her, was keeping it in a chest, in a tent, guarded by two people who are complete failures in combat, really the only plan she had. Once Melina is defeated, again in a completely different location, she is brought before Kotal Khan and unmasked. We then see that her mouth has been completely redesigned. It used to be a normal Tarkatan maw, razor-sharp teeth and seemingly no lips. Now she has a normal face but with huge teeth protruding through her cheeks. Maybe it was to make her ability to speak normally more realistic, but other Tarkatans didn't get that treatment, so I think it's more likely that it was so they could do this. D'Vorah kisses Melina with bugs that strip the flesh from her skull, killing her. It's a real shame too, because Melina has so much potential as a character. Being a clone of Kitana, who only exists to pose as Kitana's sister until it's time to live as Kitana herself, giving her no real identity of her own. But with Kitana's defection to Earthrealm, Melina takes her place as Khan's daughter, allowing her to finally escape from Kitana's shadow. Then with Khan dead, her place in the universe is much more unclear, finally giving her true freedom to choose who and what she is. But no, she goes from childlike monster to an incompetent ruler who is taken advantage of by everyone, and then she dies. She doesn't even get one last encounter with Kitana before she dies. Strike 2, D'Vorah. Kotal refuses to let the amulet return to Earthrealm, which seems reasonable until he says he doesn't care about the Accords, thereby putting Outworld and everyone in it in danger from a war with Earthrealm, which Outworld lost last time, I remind you, and has Cassie's team locked away until Raiden comes for them, which he knows he will. Kotal Khan, at first, seems like a necessary evil. He's not friends with Earthrealm, but he's willing to work with them out of respect for them freeing Outworld from Shao Kahn's tyranny, and because it's the best choice for Outworld to prosper. Earthrealm then works with him because Melina is a worse option for them. Kotal and Earthrealm aren't friends, but they understand that they need each other as the alternative is bad for them both. But in this scene, it becomes clear that Kotal is just a villain who only wants power and doesn't really care about his people. Now, maybe this was the intent, but he's never called out for being no better than his predecessor. Maybe the next game will delve more into this idea, but I sincerely doubt it. D'Vorah's third strike comes with the reveal that she's actually working with Quan Chi. Whether or not she was always a spy for Shinnok even back during Melina's reign is unclear. Quan Chi orders her to bring the amulet to him, and we see him in the Netherrealm with his top lieutenants. Liu Kang, Kitana, Kung Lao and Sindel, his 4 horsemen. How quaint. They ride for his fortress because they can't just use a portal apparently, while D'Vorah steals the amulet. I hate her and I want her to die. You may notice that Quan Chi's new costume here greatly resembles an unused concept from the last game, which they passed up in favour of reusing the same anachronistic design they'd been using for the better part of a decade. Presumably, whoever had the sexual fetish for that costume was fired between games and someone with taste was brought on board instead. Definitely a good call. I didn't really need to see his pasty nipples though. We then find Jax living on a farm where Sonya arrives. They mention Jax's wife Vera, who doesn't actually appear, though it's suggested that she and Jax were together before he died, which is why she was never mentioned once before now. It transpires that Sonya letting Jackie join the SF led to a falling out between the two friends. Sonya tells Jax about Quan Chi's return, which Jax claims is the first time in 25 years, contradicting the earlier on-screen text. I got into this more in A Line Through Time, but needless to say, these people do not know what they're doing. Sonya wants Jax to come help despite being retired because he knows Quan Chi better than anyone. I guess they couldn't just reach out to Scorpion, him being on decent terms with them as we later see. Idiots. In their cells, Cassie and Jin connect over their familial expectations, while Takeda and Jackie talk about their absentee fathers. It's a nice scene that helps to strengthen the bonds between the team with some amusing lines, incorrect view of the timeline notwithstanding. When food is brought, Takeda telepathically knocks out the guard and opens the cells. Chapter 7, Takeda Takahashi flashes back 5 years to the ruins of the city from the start of the game, which now looks like it's from The Last of Us. A Shirairu-clad Takeda is in the middle of a training exercise with Scorpion, now going by his real name and lacking a mask. He looks really bad like this. Weirdly, you don't actually get to play this fight, presumably because we've already fought Scorpion twice by now. Instead, Kenshi arrives to inform Takeda of his assignment to the Special Forces. The origin of Takeda's name is obvious. A supporting character in the first episode of Mortal Kombat Conquest with that name was possessed by Scorpion. It was pronounced as Takeda there, while Scorpion said Takeda. In the game though, everyone says Takeda, which must have been annoying for the anime voice actors who knew better. And Shirai Ryu is still a thing, despite improving on the pronunciation of Liu Kang and Kung Lao. Takeda calls out Kenshi for being totally absent from his son's life for a decade, which Kenshi and Hanzo explain was because Takeda's mother didn't die in an accident as he was told. In truth, the Red Dragon clan had come for Kenshi and she was killed instead. He was off doing nothing of note according to his bio. I assume they chose the Red Dragon because of Kenshi's minor rivalry with Movado and Deadly Alliance, but that's not part of this timeline either. In fact, he never mentions Shang Tsung despite his quest to kill the sorcerer being a key part of his old backstory. Yeah, Shang Tsung is dead, but you'd think it would come up at least once. I suppose it's somewhat fitting for Kenshi and Scorpion to be allies, given that Kenshi was originally portrayed as a lone wolf on a quest for revenge too. In Deadly Alliance, he only joined the Special Forces so he could gain access to Outworld to hunt Shang Tsung. In Armageddon, he joins up with the other heroes but intends to be the leader, proving he's quite full of himself. In MKX though, he's more than happy to have friends and allies, and aside from caring about his son, has no real personality of which to speak. As Hanzo talks Takeda down, you start to realise that Takeda's orange headband is a combination of Hanzo's yellow one and Kenshi's red blindfold. Nice touch. It becomes clear that Kenshi hasn't even succeeded in the mission that kept him away for 10 years, as he plans on training Takeda in telepathy and then going after the Red Dragon together. Bit of an odd detail, don't you think? Back in the present, I bet you're sick of hearing that, Reptile, Ermac and Eren Black are investigating the theft of the amulet. They spot the kids and immediately assume that they're working with Devora because fight time. They're idiots. Fight time. Because fight time. Takeda uses QuickTime events to sense the invisible reptile and defeats him in a proper fight. As always, the others are useless, so Takeda fights Eren, who loses his hat in the cutscene because his sword variant doesn't have one. Ermac takes down the others easily, so Takeda takes him down single-handed. Again, insane power fluctuations. Kotal's enforcers report that Devora is working with Earthrealm, so Kotal decides to invade Earthrealm to reclaim the amulet. And no, it's not really treated as a big deal that Outworld is invading again. Surely if the kids were working with her, she would have freed them, you goddamn idiots. The kids speak with Kenshi and Jax over the radio, transitioning into Chapter 8, Jax. The two are meeting with Serena, whose backstory is unclear. Did she still seek out the younger Sub-Zero a decade after her alleged death? We've got no idea. And for some reason, she still sports the Brotherhood of Shadow emblem despite having betrayed them 25 to 30 years ago. She and Jax explain that Quan Chi is weaker without Shinnok, and Jax warns that
Still Quan Chi though.
I assume this is the writers trying to present the idea that Quan Chi got his ass kicked so bad by Sonya because he was weaker, while also maintaining the idea that Quan Chi is a super powerful badass who's still a threat because we can't put down the Sorcerer Supreme, can we? Kenshi offers Jax a chance to help in the fight, but he says he's too rusty, despite this being his chapter, so we know that's far from the case. The SF opened fire on Quan Chi's group, which now includes Stryker and Cabal. Now, the more observant among you may notice that Quan Chi had 10 Revenants in MK 2011. He also has 10 in this game, not counting Scorpion. However, he gained Liu Kang after we saw the Revenants last time, so why hasn't the number gone up? Jade is totally absent from the game. Outside of Kitana's arcade ending and her mournful variation which uses Jade's weapons, Jade isn't even mentioned in MKX. I guess she's just dead then, but why? Does Quan Chi have a hard limit of 10 revenants and had to kill one off so he could get Liu Kang to join the party? It's so weird, especially when they could have just given her Kitana's mournful moveset and had what is basically a fully playable Jade for the story mode. Nightwolf and Smoke are also absent here, and Nightwolf will not be coming back. Kenshi is actually competent for once and takes out Cabal, and the two monks try to escort Quan Chi away. Jax follows and fights Kung Lao. He then picks up a rifle to shoot Quan Chi, but is attacked by Sindel. This moment highlights one of the biggest wasted opportunities of the story mode: variations. With the exception of the Cage Lineage power-up, the only times characters change variation while being played as is when the story switches between two different points in time, such as Sonya, who uses special forces in the past and Demolition in the present. Now I get that the changes in appearances might make some of these weird, but they're not above it. Some characters do look different when they switch from default looks in cutscenes to a variation in-game. And let's not forget that using different variations would help add some variety to the fights. Jax is actually one of the easier ones to make work. With all of these special forces grunts around, having Jax start with his heavy weapon style, then lose those weapons to a Revenant, or have him take them from a fallen comrade and use them from that point on, would be trivial to set up. It would be kinda like when Jax used up all the ammo in his SMG in DCU and had to fight Wonder Woman without it. But no, if they're not taking part in flashbacks, they use one style. The way Sindel talks about Quan Chi reuniting her with her family really gives some insight into how the Revenant mind is twisted, since normally they just act angry at whoever they're fighting. Once Sindel goes down, Jax goes to save Serena from Kitana. Kitana pulls an injustice by jumping over Jax so she can be on the right side of the screen for the fight. Kenshi's too injured to continue, surprise surprise, so Jax goes on alone. Liu Kang shows his anger at Raiden for his fuck-ups, as well as his new red and black fireballs. Jax beats him, then punches Quan Chi out. We don't even get a fight because Sonya's already fought him and characters can only be fought twice each, so the honour of the second fight goes to Scorpion in Chapter 9. Johnny and Kenshi bring Quan Chi in and lock him in a shipping container. Jax presumably fucked off back to his farm and will not be seen, nor I think mentioned again. Cassie reports to Sonya that they're tracking Devourer, while Hanzo sneaks into the base with some of his followers. Johnny gets Sonya to be less of a hard ass with Cassie, and Hanzo approaches to demand Quan Chi. Sonya explains that they need Quan Chi for Raiden to be able to restore the others, though it's never explained what Raiden's even been doing since contact was lost with him in Chapter 5. Hanzo doesn't care and just wants revenge, so a fight breaks out. He beats Sonya, then QTEs Johnny in what I guess is supposed to be a callback to the first QTE. After Johnny is beaten, Kenshi urges Hanzo to not destroy his clan's bond with everyone else, but he refuses to listen. We flash back to 5 years ago yet again because it would be just unreasonable to assume these events could occur in different years of the 20-year time skip apparently. Hanzo meets with Sub-Zero at the Lin Kuei Temple. Sub-Zero seeks peace with Hanzo, explaining that Sector had taken over the clan and cyberized them. Sub-Zero killed Sector and uncovered the clan's dark secrets. And he also now has the Dragon Medallion in the cutscene because he's going to use that variation here? Then just make his arms blue in the other scene. This just highlights the fact that the characters always look better with no variations, but they can't use that in the cutscenes, even though it would be way better. Frost appears out of nowhere and attacks, but is knocked out, and Hanzo, thinking it's a setup, fights Sub-Zero. You know, because Scorpion fighting Sub-Zero is not overdone in the slightest, and we absolutely should have it in every single fucking game. And keep in mind that Frost is supposed to be not that much younger than Sub-Zero, going off her appearance in Deadly Alliance, which would take place at least a decade before this, and yet, she looks and sounds like she's about 19. Frost tries again, but Sub-Zero freezes her so he can talk with Hanzo. Weirdly, Frost didn't appear in the previous Lin Kuei scene, nor will she appear in the next, leaving one to wonder if she was exiled for this, or if she made her ill-fated move against him like in the first timeline. Sub-Zero takes Hanzo to Sector's remains and shows him a recording of Quan Chi communicating with Sector and admitting to having wiped out the Shade Ryu. Somehow, Sub-Zero hadn't known about this until now, making one wonder what their clan was told about their ancient enemies being wiped out all of a sudden. Quan Chi makes out that the Lin Kuei owes Shinnok for this, despite the fact that Quan Chi wiping them out wasn't to put the Lin Kuei in his debt. It was payment for Bihan's successful mission for him in MK Mythologies. Quan Chi speaks of creating Scorpion from Hasashi's soul as if they're two separate entities. This is an utterly retarded idea that is expanded on in a stupid way in the comic, but that's for another time. For now, Hanzo is remorseful for Bihan's death and he and Kuai Liang make up. It's nice. But back in the present, where Hanzo apparently waited 5 years before finally trying to find Quan Chi, the SF members are tied up and Quan Chi is brought before Hanzo.
Scorpion, we can... My name is Hanzo Hasashi! Are you killed my wife, my son, and then you burrowed your way into my head, misdirected my vengeance, cost me my one chance to have them restored!
After the fight, he beats Quan Chi up some more, but D'Vorah arrives and she and Hanzo wound each other. Hanzo pulls Quan Chi away from D'Vorah with his spear, and his use of Ed Boon's shout is incredibly jarring after listening to Patrick Seitz' voice for the last 20 minutes. I think, after having voiced the character in 4 consecutive games released over the course of 10 years, that at least in cutscenes, Patrick Seitz should be the one doing the shout, not Ed Boon. D'Vorah throws the amulet as Quan Chi chants to free Shinnok, succeeding just as Hanzo's blade slices through his neck and severs his head. Now, anyone who's familiar with my MK 2011 reviews will know that I despise Quan Chi with the fiery intensity of the Netherrealm's lava oceans. Therefore, you must assume that this moment was a real highlight for me, seeing Quan Chi finally get what was coming to him after so long. Unfortunately, this is not the case for 2 reasons. 1. This moment was spoiled for me ahead of time by commenters on those 2 videos because I guess they assumed that after those 2-hour-long savage rants that I'd buy MKX day 1.
What would you do with a brain if you had one?
2. The death of Quan Chi also prevents the other revenants from being restored because apparently the Elder Gods can neither be asked nor asked to get involved. So ultimately my reaction to his death was less... and more...
Yeah, rip.
Honestly, I think Quan Chi's fate is far more satisfying in his non-canonical ending where the Elder Gods strip away his free will and make him their servant. But back to the inferior canon. Shinnok is restored and has somehow changed clothes while imprisoned. Hanzo and the SF trio go down to single hits because the writing has gone downhill since the first chapter, and D'Vorah reveals that Quan Chi allowed himself to be captured so he could revive Shinnok in Earthrealm because even after the pasty balls fucker is dead, we have to present him as the ultimate mastermind. Fuck you, NetherRealm Studios. Fuck you. The main 4 revenants arrive with the now mute Smoke, while Stryker and Cabal have joined Nightwolf in their absence from the rest of the story. Shinnok takes Johnny just before the kids return. Hanzo directs the kids to the Sky Temple because he instinctively knows where Shinnok is going despite Shinnok having said nothing of his plans beyond that the SF in the Netherrealm would be neutralised. It's hard to take Shinnok seriously as the threat since 1. He was beaten by Johnny Cage at the start of the game, and 2. They still haven't fixed the issue that you don't get to play as the villains in story mode so they never win fights, making them look like complete jokes. But yeah, Hanzo was right about Shinnok's destination as we see in Chapter 10, Raiden. We see Bo Rai Cho bumming around until Raiden arrives. The weird thing here is that Bo Rai Cho was absent for all of MK 2011 and Shinnok's invasion, despite both stories offering plenty of opportunity for him to play a part. Instead, they wait until now, the start of the 3rd act of the 2nd game, to bring him in to serve as Raiden's main ally. And yes, I said main ally, so you may be asking, what about Fujin? Just like how there was no reason for Bo Rai Cho to not appear earlier, there's no reason for Fujin to not appear now. I mean, there is a very simple explanation for it. The writers forgot about him. I assumed when I first played the game that this was something they'd explain in the comic, but no, he lives through that no worse for wear and doesn't get a single mention in the game after Shinnok's imprisonment. And it wouldn't have been hard to do either. A simple mention of where he is would do. Maybe he's urging the Elder Gods to step in and help stop Shinnok. I'm not asking for much here, I'm just asking that when you go to the effort of designing, modelling, writing and casting a character, that you don't just have them drop off the face of the earth without explanation. Bo Rai Cho asks where the hell Raiden's been and he explains.
When Kano misappropriated Shinnok's amulet, he left behind a snare. Disabling it required that I travel to many strange realms.
Again, there are many questions without answers, and some new questions are raised here. 1. How did Kano get past Raiden, the Shaolin, and the SF's defences? 2. What were the defences? Was it like in Harry Potter where they each provide something specific to their specialties, like some sort of godly magic from Raiden or something? 3. What kind of snare was it? 4. What did it actually do? 5. How did he get hold of something so mystical that Raiden needed to travel to find a solution to it? 6. What strange realms? Order and Chaos? The Dream Realm? Or something new entirely? 7. Why did he never try to re-establish contact with Sonya after contact was lost between them in Chapter 5? And 8. 8, building on that, what happened to the soldiers Sonya sent to check on him? It is unjustifiably vague, considering that the weakness of these defences is a key component of Kotal Khan's motivation throughout the story, and for allowing Quan Chi to reobtain the amulet and restore Shinnok. It's kinda fucking important. Raiden needs to recharge his energy in the Jinsei, which you'd think they'd have said he was doing to explain why he was gone for so long, but instead, he's not recharged to justify what happens later. Bo laments that they couldn't kill Shinnok because he's not mortal, but the games have never suggested that a god, even an elder god, was incapable of dying. In fact, we see him die in Quan Chi's non-canon MK4 ending, and Sonya says in her very canonical ending,
Shinnok is dead. The good guys won.
And then in Armageddon, Shinnok sent a doppelganger to the battle in his place because he didn't want to get killed. But later on in this game, Shinnok is confirmed to indeed be unkillable due to his godhood, but why make this change? Is it to justify them not killing Shinnok earlier so he could return for the climax? Why yes it is. They reiterate that they need Quan Chi alive to restore the heroes, but in theory the Jinsei could probably do it. The two lament the deaths of Liu Kang and Kung Lao, which leads us into another flashback, to Outworld 25 years ago. This scene is set during the MK2 portion of MK 2011, where the two monks had gone off to free their captured Shaolin brethren. Where do I fucking begin with this? Okay, first of all, their costumes are completely different. Liu Kang's is similar to his formal attire from the previous game, so I'm not sure why they couldn't have at least coloured it as such, even if just for the Player 2 version. Kung Lao also has a long ponytail and a different outfit. Some characters like Johnny Cage, Kano and Scorpion also have tournament costumes based on the previous game, but they actually look like them. Raiden, meanwhile, is in his MK1 look, which this scene confirms is now being retconned as what he was wearing throughout MK 2011 instead of his MK2 look, which his primary costume in this game is already based on. Why not keep the primary for flashbacks and give him a new one for the present? That one could still be his primary costume since Scorpion, Sub-Zero and a few others don't use their defaults in the story at all. Secondly, Raiden shouldn't even be here since this whole scenario existed to give Liu Kang and Kung Lao a reason to be away while Raiden, Jax and Johnny search for Sonya. Now though, we are to believe that he helped the two out here, then left them to do cleanup while he returned to the tournament without them? Why not just give this chapter to Liu Kang? Maybe have Bo Rai Cho reminisce about training the two, giving us Liu Kang versus Kung Lao, then him helping them out here, then return to the present and give us Revenant Liu Kang for a couple fights. But no, screw that, just have Raiden do everything. And lastly, the time frame is also fucked because MK 2011 presented MK 1-3 as taking place one after the other in very quick succession 2 years before MK4. This says MK2 happened 25 years ago, just as Jack says events after MK4 did, which on-screen text claims was 20 years ago. This isn't even an issue of franchise continuity, it's a serious problem that prevents the player from fully comprehending the order and timeline of events in one single story. Honest to God, this is like reading the first draft of a story. You get shit like Sonya sending those soldiers to check on Raiden and then it never comes up again. You get all this weird timeline stuff where it's completely inconsistent from moment to moment. And I'm not even going to get into the pointless filler fights that these games are fucking plagued with. That's a whole issue in and of itself, but that at least serves in some instances to give additional fights. It adds gameplay, which is more than you can say for this amateurish bullshit. Check your fucking writing before you release your game, Netherrealm. Christ. Weirdly, the conversation leads to Raiden explaining why Khan had the Tarkatans attack the Wuxi Academy in MK2 in 2011, that he was displaying Earthrealm's vulnerability to force him to agree to his terms. But I thought that was the purpose of capturing Sonya and proposing the new stipulation. If anything, this would help better justify the original scenario before they changed it in 2011, where there was really nothing to gain from them competing in the Outworld tournament beyond saving Sonya, which only Jax and maybe Johnny and Liu Kang would have had a stake in. I mean, they already retconned it in the last game, so why do they need to add this here? So the three head in to save the monks and we see that the Tarkatans are led by Baraka and Devora. Strike fucking 4. Devora is now being retconned into the events of the original trilogy. Fuck you. You see now how she got on my goddamn shit list in just one game? Introduce a new character, fine. Mention that they served a major character in the past but we never saw them, also fine. But putting them into the middle of events we previously knew of. Interacting with not only the villains but the protagonists as well, which none of them ever mention again, is just awful. And there's also a limit on how long after a story is told that you can go back and establish that other characters were totally there all along. This just just reads like bad fanfiction where D'Vorah is this shitty self-insert that no one wants. I'm seriously thinking that MKX might actually be worse written than MK2011, and just take a moment to let that sink in. Think about that for a minute. I mean, MK2011 was a complete farce, but at the very least you could follow what was fucking happening. Raiden fights Baraka, then D'Vorah, because Liu Kang and Kung Lao's off-screen quest was just about playing second fiddle to Raiden. Why were they even needed here? To steer the fucking boat? Back in the present, Raiden's recuperation is interrupted as the chamber begins to collapse and Bo Rai Cho is ambushed by Shinnok. The fact that a simple hole can be blasted in the wall makes one wonder, why last time did they attack at the door with no one trying to get in from above? Considering Shinnok's significant numerical advantage, it shouldn't have been too hard to keep Raiden and Fujin distracted at the door while someone else blasted in from above. Oh wait, no, he didn't have that many revenants back then, did he? Shinnok blasts Bo Rai Cho and he stops moving, and after this scene we never see him again, leaving his fate unknown. This is yet another wasted opportunity since the revenants are here too, but Liu Kang and Kung Lao have no reaction to Bo Rai Cho's possible death, not even a glance at their possibly dead mentor, and keep in mind, he never did anything wrong to them. Raiden's the only one they actually hate. Also, it just occurred to me, why did the SF not take these revenants into custody after Jax and Kenshin knocked them all out? Yet another plot hole! Although Kung Lao being trained by Bo Rai Cho before Deadly Alliance is also a continuity issue, but it's ultimately less of a big deal that they retconned him into being an apprentice than it is that they did nothing with it. Shinnok heads inside while the revenants surround Raiden, shoving him around like fucking children before he starts kicking their asses. Raiden electrocutes them unconscious, but Kung Lao avoids it and fights him proper, blaming Raiden for his death, which the latter again laments. Liu Kang is naturally next, taunting Raiden about his visions, which the latter claims are gone now. I find this odd when there are suggestions of other events yet to come that resemble the original timeline, which again I'll discuss later on. Liu Kang is defeated but manages to wound Raiden, who heads inside. This at first looks like it's leading to an ending similar to Injustice, where good Superman just shows up after being mostly absent and ends the conflict himself. Luckily though, that is not the case, as Shinnok captures Raiden with a skeleton hand that he can't teleport out of for some reason. Shinnok enters the Jinsei and corrupts it, turning the sky red as all of Earth's warriors watch in horror. Shinnok then transforms into Corrupted Shinnok, the arcade mode final boss inspired by his demon form from mythologies. Thus the game enters Chapter 11, which leads to the franchise being bought out by Warner Bros. Jackie is our new hero, and this chapter is the most boring in the entire game. Not because her moveset isn't that interesting because it's one of the best, but because of the scenario we're thrust into. The team have to travel to the cave portal since the Sky Temple doesn't strictly exist in Earthrealm's reality or something. It's a basic quantum concept that is only now being introduced, but they don't elaborate any further. This could have been an opportunity to expand on how the realms all fit together, maybe by saying that they all exist in the same space, which is how realm merging is possible, but no, nothing as usual. After landing, Jackie and Takeda flirts, but Kotal arrives with his army before they can advance. He immediately attacks them without letting them explain the situation, so they run and hide. After they scatter the enemy with weapons, Reptile attacks Jackie and spits acid in Takeda's eyes. After taking Reptile down, Jackie uses water to get the acid out. He's totally fine thanks to that, which seems odd. You'd think the idea was that he'd be rendered blind like his father, but his vision remains perfectly fine. Maybe the idea was that it's a subversion. You think the son will resemble the father more, but they stop that from happening? I don't know, it seems weird to include if all it results in is showing that the two are falling in love, which was already clear before the fight started. Ermac interrupts them and chases them towards Kotal. Instead of just having his army kill them, he just fights Takeda while Jackie fights Ermac.
We took your father's arms. We will take all of you.
That was for you, Dad.
Ferret and Tor get in Jackie's way as she tries to help Takeda, but they lose too. Somehow Cassie and Jin are only fighting random goons and Eren Black has disappeared. Jackie is finally able to explain the situation to Kotal because he's too much of a fucking retard to figure out himself that Shinnok is free and has made the sky red. And yes, the comic makes it clear that he has been to Earthrealm before. His response then is to give up on Earthrealm entirely and try to earn favour with Shinnok by killing the four. What a shit character. Jackie beats him and Eren finally shows himself as the heroes are surrounded. Luckily, Sub-Zero shows up with the Lin Kuei in tow. He praises their ability to work as a team and sends them on ahead, leading to Chapter 12, Cassie Cage. Obviously, this is the climax. Liu Kang reports that the Oni and Orochi, or Orochi as he says it, are ready, but since they never appear in the game, anyone new to the series will have no idea what he's talking about. The Oni are at least represented by Moloch's severed head in Quan Chi's intro. The Orochi Hellbeasts were a sub-boss exclusive to Shaolin monks that are only memorable because of their stupidly metal name. The male revenants leave to access Raiden's portal to the heavens, which Raiden needs because he can't just teleport there like he could in the last fucking game, leaving Kitana and Sindel to guard the entrance. Cassie and Jin fight while Jackie saves Takeda from falling to his death. I mean, at least it's not Cassie fighting Sindel and the other three getting their asses kicked by Kitana. Cassie fights Sindel first, who offers to be Cassie's mother? It's really weird and just highlights how much wasted potential Sindel had. Yeah, look out for that. Jackie gets Takeda up and they join in just as Jin is knocked out. Kitana holds her own against all three and wounds the other two. I guess I spoke too soon. Cassie wins and Takeda and Jackie send the other two ahead while they hold off Liu Kang, Kung Lao and Smoke, while contending with stab wounds, yes. Of course you know they're going to succeed despite being at a disadvantage in numbers, stamina and combat prowess, especially against the champion of Mortal Kombat, Liu Kang. This is yet another asinine plot development. Johnny is tied up and being ineffectually eaten by bugs by the time the duo get inside. Jin goes down easily again because the story structure can only succeed in making everyone look weak. Cassie beats Devora while the two outside hold their own against all 5 Revenants. Maybe this is why Striker, Cabal and Nightwolf dropped off the face of the earth, because adding any more Revenants for the 2 wounded guys to hold off would be totally unbelievable. Johnny tells Cassie to stop Shinnok and tells her that he loves her in a tone that suggests he's going to die despite nothing setting that idea up. Cassie gets her ass kicked as if she wasn't being played as, but she taps into her father's magic power of love bullshit when Johnny's threatened and beats the shit out of Shinnok. Oh, and corrupted Shinnok and Quan Chi's AIs can fuck right off, yeah? Yeah? Okay. Jin finally compliments Cassie, bringing another character arc to a close. Raiden tells him to put him in the Jinsei so he can heal and undo Shinnok's corruption, despite Jin saying it would kill Raiden. Shinnok is reverted to his original form and the corruption is undone, causing the Revenants to flee. They leave 2 of the people who foiled the plan alive for no reason and just go. Maybe the idea is that they're freed from Shinnok and Quan Chi's mind control, but are still corrupted. So, you know, they have no desire for revenge or to kill these 2, but retreat anyway. Now this, I think, is where Raiden should have died. They brought up the guilt he feels over what happened to the heroes last time, so letting him sacrifice himself to undo Shinnok's corruption and bring an end to this would be fitting and could set up the still corrupted heroes having some doubts about their actions going into MK11. Instead, Raiden lives to set up an entirely different plotline. Takeda and Jackie seem to officially become a couple, while Cassie helps Johnny. Sonya arrives with her men, making one wonder how hard Hanzo and Shinnok beat her for her to have been absent all this time. And more than that, how hard was Kenshi beating to not show up at all? Johnny again comments on how Sonya called him Johnny, bookending the story quite nicely. A number of threads are still left hanging as the credits roll, starting with an image of Goro who wasn't even in the fucking mode you just played through. Really pressuring us with that DLC, AWB. In the middle of the credits, another scene plays. Raiden, now in black with Shinnok's amulet, red eyes and a darker attitude a la Deception, makes clear the fate of all who threaten Earthrealm as he leaves the still living head of Shinnok at the feet of the new rulers of the Netherrealm, Liu Kang and Kitana. I discussed last time how certain details carrying over despite the events that caused them clearly being different were similar to a certain time travel theory that the timeline will correct itself when it's changed. Well, even with the radical changes here, that idea still holds true. Although it took a decade longer, Sub-Zero did overthrow Sector and take over the Lin Kuei. He also gained the same scar over the same eye despite it being from Kano in the comic instead of some unknown assailant before MK3. Raiden ends up corrupted by the Jinsei instead of by being touched by Onaga's essence after his sacrifice and Deception. Kung Lao, Jax and Kitana end up killed and resurrected as mind-controlled thralls, even if through very different means. Liu Kang becomes an undead threat to Earthrealm thanks to Raiden and Quan Chi's actions, even if their roles in his death and resurrection are reversed. Scorpion and Sub-Zero eventually made peace, here 5 years before MKX instead of during MK2. Even Armageddon is still a possibility since Taven remains asleep as seen in Takeda's ending, which means that Blaze hasn't sent the signal yet. I'm not sure if I'd prefer these similarities to just be random fan service or actually part of a plot about time trying to fix itself, though I don't think the writers are even smart enough to come up with the latter. Still, this ending sets up a far more interesting plot about friends turned against each other and possible redemption than the game itself offered. Although the worried expression on Liu Kang's face makes him look like not much of a threat for the next game. I just hope that we do get the heroes restored next time instead of some dumb bullshit where Liu Kang is the final boss and gets killed, since we were kinda promised it here. Some of the default costumes aren't even in the story. Scorpion and Sub-Zero is one thing, but Liu Kang, Kung Lao and Kitana's human forms are complete lies as they don't canonically exist. These cool older versions of the trio have so much more character than the Revenant versions, but they're not canonical despite being what their appearance in the game was advertised with. And Liu Kang's even offers some new insight into the Mortal Kombat tournament. Keep in mind the champion doesn't age until the next tournament, but Liu Kang would have done if he wasn't a Revenant. So with Shao Kahn's death, the Mortal Kombat cycle between Earthrealm and Outworlds has been cancelled. cancelled, meaning Liu Kang would have died of old age afterwards. Kinda fucked up that he wouldn't at least get the next 50 years, but it's an interesting development that we never really thought about before. But again, it's not canonical. Waste of goddamn time. And speaking of costumes, they really dropped the ball here. Some characters change clothes between the present and past, but Sub-Zero and Scorpion only change between undead and human despite having 3 costumes by default. Why couldn't Scorpion and Sub-Zero be unmasked during social events like at the Linkway HQ and in full garb when out in the field? And another missed opportunity is the DLC characters. Because of the structure of the story mode, extra characters can't just be slotted in for extra fights, which would add some weight to their inclusion. Give us Sub-Zero dealing with Triborg while he's off screen. Give us Bo' Rai Cho recovering long enough to fight Liu Kang and express his sorrow becoming disappointment. Give us Tremor breaking into the SF base to spring Kano and what became of Tanya and Rain. And give us Movie Night at the Cage House as Johnny shows his daughter a bunch of horror sequels he starred in after saving Earthrealm. The characters they gave us are cool, but even the canonical ones feel like a waste when they don't affect the story in any meaningful way. DLC, as can be expected, came in the form of costumes and new characters. Also the pit. It's kind of weird that there weren't more DLC stages, especially when the base game doesn't have a single returning stage or all that many stages in general. The first DLC was the day 1 pre-order character Goro. That's right, pre-order to access an iconic character like Goro. Somehow this prevents him from being part of the story mode even though he's already in the game as the arcade mode sub-boss, and yeah, they do explain his absence in the comic, but that just makes it even weirder because in the comic he gets his shit pushed in super fucking hard. They're not very good at this whole marketing thing, are they? Next was the first wave of characters, Fighter Pack 1. Tanya was made playable, though with a completely different face. Tremor from Special Forces, long requested by the fans for some reason, was finally given his own look and persona, and guest fighters Jason Voorhees and Disney's Predator joined the fray as well. Weirdly, only Shinnok has unique lines with the Predator, which you'd think if only one character would, it'd be Johnny Cage, or Jax for the sake of the Carl Weathers skin. Now, some of these characters also came with extra costumes for the other characters, such as Predator's Heat Vision Scorpion and Carl Weathers Jax, but Fighter Pack 2 characters would not. Fighter Pack 2 released all in one go alongside the complete edition Mortal Kombat XL. It made Bo' Rai Cho playable, introduced Triborg, and added Leatherface and a Tarkatan Xenomorph. Again, the guest fighters are pretty hype, but Triborg is the one that stands out to me. He's a new cyborg character who utilises the moves of Sector, Cyrax and Smoke through his variations. He can also secretly utilise Sub-Zero's moves in place of the no variation option, though how exactly Triborg can utilise the moves of Cyber Smoke when he never existed in this timeline is anyone's guess. Costumes range from original trilogy costumes to weird themes like Brazilian football, Metro 2033, Samurai and Mad Max. As with previous games, DLC characters sadly lack alternate costumes aside from Leatherface and Triborg's variations. It really sucks, especially when they all have easy options to choose from. Ed Boon hinted at a kind of story mode pack which would presumably make other characters from story mode that aren't playable into playable characters. Sadly, no such thing ever emerged, which is a real shame because I'd like to have seen the likes of Sindel, Rain and Corrupted Shinnok return fully, especially when work's already gone into their movesets, and maybe Fujin or Frost too. Maybe the team didn't want to, or maybe WB pushed them along to start Injustice 2. Or maybe they planned to put them into the previous packs alongside Tanya and Bo' Rai Cho, but were vetoed by Warner Bros due to the guest fighters being the best selling of all the DLCs the studio produces, and they thus wanted more. As cool as the guest fighters are though, they ultimately started a trend that continued into Injustice 2, where a lot of the DLC slots started going to guest characters. Now don't get me wrong, guest characters are hype as fuck and make a ton of money, but it's hard to shake the feeling that these roster slots would have been far better utilised by characters from the actual brand instead. Alien and Predator are fucking dope though. Now, after everything I've just discussed, I bet most of you are thinking, wow, Snake really hates this game, and no, not really. The gameplay, while still somewhat slow and janky, is smooth and competent enough to not feel bad to play like its predecessor. Sure, the new stages aren't that interesting, and some of the new costumes aren't great either, but some costumes are good, even if a lot of them lack imagination. Finishers are hit or miss again, with sadly more misses than hits. The amount of content on offer stands head and shoulders above just about anything else in its genre right now, even if some of the best of it was released after the fact for an additional cost.
You son of a bitch.
Most of my issues are with the story and the new cast being either uninteresting or underdeveloped. Many of them seem almost directly ripped off from other sources, and the idea that we lost so many classic characters for what basically amounts to fanfiction future kids and a bunch of cunts is not a particularly thrilling prospect for the series going forward. The fact that only 4 characters from the 3D era that weren't previously featured in MK 2011 were brought back, coupled with a bunch of them getting abruptly killed off in the comics with no real build-up or attempt to give them a second chance to impress the fans, is a clear indicator that this is where the series' new direction officially begins with its new cast and story, and it's really not done enough to interest me in any of that. In particular, the fact that vast amounts of the franchise's cast, setting and lore can be just discarded on a whim gives me little reason to care about any of the new stuff when there's a good chance that will just be removed too. It's the same reason the DC universe is hard to get invested in with all the goddamn reboots. Hate isn't what I feel for this game aside from the story, it's more disappointment. I waited 5 years between MK 2011 and MKXL for the latter to make the former feel like it was all worth it in the grand tapestry of the Mortal Kombat franchise, but it just didn't. X is competent, it's not offensive in the way Injustice and 2011 are. I'll still play the next game because, as someone who's been invested in the franchise for probably longer than half the people currently making the games, I need to know how the reboot trilogy ends. I need to see if the series can actually be redeemed from this point. MKX was better than expected, so I do hold out some hope that MK11 will be the piece of the puzzle that truly brings it all together. But given the company's track record and with the quality of the writing outside of banter, I'm unfortunately not convinced that I'll ever be able to enjoy what was once my favourite franchise in all of entertainment ever again.
Well, thanks for that. I know I'll never eat again.